Welcome to the Mountain Valor podcast. Our guest today is the founder and executive director of Mountain Valor, Katt Wittenberger. Catherine Katt Wittenberger is a retired U.S. Navy Command Senior Chief, nonprofit executive, rural Virginia farmer, and marketing professional whose career has centered on leadership, communication, and building functional systems in complex environments. She is a native of Greenville, Wisconsin. She enlisted in the U.S. Navy in 2000 and served more than 2 decades as a Navy journalist and mass communication specialist. She has a number of assignments to include a couple of sea tours, expeditionary tours with Naval Special Warfare Groups 2 and 4, and expeditionary combat camera, as well as some shore tours to include serving as the Command Senior Chief at the Naval Academy Preparatory School and retired from the Navy Leadership and Ethics Center in October 2021. Following her retirement, Katt relocated to Floyd, Virginia, where she founded Mountain Valor Veteran Services, a veteran-led, non-membership nonprofit focused on reaching veterans, caregivers, spouses, and survivors who have been disconnected from traditional systems, particularly those living in rural communities. Mountain Valor delivers weekly in-person outreach across rural Virginia and hosts Mountain Valor Fest, the state's only large-scale veteran outreach and resource event designed specifically for rural populations. Welcome, Katt. Glad to have you on your podcast today.
This is a little awkward, but I like it.
Hey, who better than to talk about Mountain Valor than the founder and executive director of Mountain Valor?
I know a thing or two, I think.
Before we start talking about Mountain Valor, I want to talk a little bit about your background. You retired as a U.S. Navy Command Senior Chief. How has your experience in the Navy shaped your approach to building a non-membership nonprofit from the ground up?
I think it was pretty central to everything that we've designed. You know, when you're still active duty on your base, you have everything that you possibly need as a human, right? You have, medical, you have dental, you have your training. You potentially have a place to change the oil on your car. There are, like, for the Navy, it's Fleet and Family Services, where there's mental health providers, there's folks to help you with your finances. Potentially your command's going to force you to go there if you're having issues budgeting. There's all sorts of people to talk to about basically every situation that a human can encounter. And when I retired, moved out here to the mountains of Virginia, I realized none of that exists in a way that is easily accessible or that clearly translates to someone who just walked out of the military. So a lot of what Mountain Valor does is go find those resources, figure out what they're called, figure out how they work and what their admissions processes are. And then we have that knowledge for when a veteran approaches us. And even if they just make an offhanded remark about, oh, I really wish I could, we know where to send them.
Excellent. Yeah, and now that you mention it that way, that does make a lot of sense. A military installation, there is everything, and then, like you said, you come out to beautiful Floyd, and it's really difficult to see how to connect any of that stuff together.
It's worth it, but the bears running around and the coyotes can't actually help you with your taxes.
Are you sure about that, though?
I have not asked specifically. I'll work on that.
You spent 2 decades as a Navy journalist and mass communication specialist. How does that background in storytelling help you cut through the legal terminology that often overwhelms veterans and their families?
I think it's pretty critical. The Navy basically trained me to be able to communicate clearly and concisely to a wide range of audiences. And the very first part of that is figuring out who the audience is and what knowledge they're approaching the conversation with. And so that helps when we're talking to the media. It helps when we're talking to potential supporters. It really helps when we're approaching veterans. We can put ourselves, more eye to eye with understanding why they don't have the information that we're trying to provide them, why it's important to them, and kind of figure out how to nudge them into potentially making phone calls they don't want to make, or giving the VA another try. For a lot of folks it's the third or fourth time they've tried to get healthcare through the VA, and knowing how to have that conversation to convince them like it's really worth it. I know it's been embarrassing, I know it's been a very long process, but there are changes, there's good changes out there, and it's going to be worth it this time. And understanding how to approach the individual, it's key.
Excellent, excellent. And I would imagine that most people are frightened to death to go and do a presentation, and now you're doing a presentation of a completely new concept. And so, yeah, I can understand how, being a journalist and a mass communication specialist, where you're an expert in this, can easily bring you to the forefront of an organization like Mountain Valor. So that's really pretty. It's a pretty cool thing. I also want to ask you about this idea. When I remember when you first moved out here, you talked about helping women veterans in rural areas access, the VA and other support organizations, and then at some point this exploded into Mountain Valor. Can you talk a little bit about how that all happened, how that all came about?
It was more of a needs assessment. So I had an idea in my head for what I wanted to do, but the more that I opened my eyes and my ears and paid attention to what was really needed, it wasn't just the woman veteran focus that I had expected. It honestly, it skews a lot more toward the older elderly vets and their caregivers and their families who have just, they haven't been connected. They don't know what's out there, and they're suffering because of that. And I couldn't ignore that.
Yeah, that's, as we've talked before, that is a scary thing out there. That there are great organizations that are doing great things, but if you don't know about it or if you don't know how to access it, it really doesn't make any difference.
Right. I think the digital disconnect out here isn't understood very well.
Mm.
Floyd County has great internet, hence why we're able to do this over whichever program that we're using for this. But the counties next to us, their internet speeds are so low they can't do telehealth with a VA. It won't
Wow.
allow them to. The system won't do it. Uh, and so, you take the fact that the connection speeds are so slow, and then the digital literacy is not a strong suit out here, and it adds up to where a lot of this communication is happening is all online, and the people who potentially need it the most can't access any of it.
Right. And then they're stuck, if they want to know something, they're stuck going to either Salem or Martinsville. Is that where the other VA hospital is?
There's a clinic up in Wytheville, uh,
Okay.
and then there's a couple smaller, basically community care conglomerations around, but those don't have BVA folks. They don't have benefits folks there to talk to them about any of
Okay.
that.
Okay. And so again, they get left behind. They get lost because there's who's reaching out to them, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's really kind of scary.
It is, and there's a specific statistic. Mountain Valor is part of the regional VA suicide prevention. I can't remember the rest of the acronym. It's very long, but we're part of their suicide prevention team for the region. And Virginia has the highest number of veterans who are fully eligible for VA healthcare that have never once applied. And so you
Wow.
see that play out, that there are major issues, and trying to ramp up and figure out how to get to somebody when they're 60, 70, getting ready to go into an elderly care center. You're trying to catch them before it's too late. That's a challenge.
Wait a minute. You said 60s or 70s? Really?
Well, especially colonels. They age faster than anybody else there.
I have no idea what you're talking about. The 2025 annual report mentions that rural veterans were falling through every gap in the system. What was the specific tipping point or story that made you realize you couldn't ignore this need anymore?
I was sitting at a friend's kitchen with her mom, right after my friend's father had passed away, and he had been retired major from the Air Force, and just a amazing human being. And I don't know what the Air Force calls sea stories, but his sea stories that were not at all based on any factual information were probably the most entertaining thing I've ever heard in my life. And trying to help the family as he was, after he passed away, access the, burial benefits and figure out the dependent indemnity compensation for the spouse, and, explain that there are things out there for them, and trying to have that conversation when they were so deep in grief. You're talking through so many layers of emotional challenges, and folks who just don't have anything left to hear what you're saying, right? And that's not the system's fault, and it's not their fault, and it's not the fault of the people that are trying to communicate with them, but it's a very real obstacle when you're trying to help somebody who has a limited duration to be able to apply for some of these things.
Right.
And it really hit home because no one that I talked to after we figured all of these things out existed, because this is before the organization was actually a thing, had no one else that I had talked to that was in the veteran realm had ever heard of any of them. And so, there's pensions out there, wartime veteran pensions for if you're below the poverty line, and there's survivor pensions if you are a widow that's below the poverty line, and all these things that are life changing, especially in rural Appalachia. And the time that somebody needs it the most is the time they're least capable of hearing that message. And so that's really part of where the organization came from, is how do we get to these folks before they are in crisis, so at least they know that there's an option. They don't need to know the details yet, but they know, hey, I should have asked this question. That's the first step of helping.
And and so you become like a repository of all of these organizations. Or, if someone needs some help, but they don't know what help they need, Mountain Valor can answer that question. You can point them in the right direction, correct?
Exactly. That's really been a really big focus, is like, we are not veteran service organization or officers. We're not going to sit there and do your benefits claim with you. I'm going to send you to an expert in that. And if you need to sign up for healthcare and you've got some weird issues that makes the online process a challenge, I'm not going to sit down there and do it with you. I'm going to tell you exactly who to talk to at the VA, because they have some great folks there who are going to walk you through it and can answer all your complicated questions. They're most up to date on everything. And, if you have a very significant disability, I'm going to get you over to the VA to talk about home modifications, things like that. But I'm also going to send you over to the New River Valley Agency on Aging, and I'm going to send you over to the New River Valley Disability Services, because they also have funding to support veterans that are in need. And a lot of what we've learned is the veterans that are associated with the VA, they think that the VA is the only place they can get assistance. And
Yep.
that's not true. You're still part of the community, so you still have access to all of these community services. And so that's really kind of how we formed a spider web of what are the options for this person facing this challenge. It's we know what the VA can and can't do, but then what else is there? Is there something faster if it's a crisis? Is there something that might be better suited later on? What is the best possible track for this family and what they're facing?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've never thought about that. I know you've talked about that before, but I don't even think there's another organization out there that is doing that. I mean, so many organizations are so narrowly focused on, hey, we're good at these things, but you're not just, I mean, your focus is on the veteran. Your focus isn't on all the services that you can provide or recommend them to. So you're looking at everything and saying, hey, you know, you've been a veteran, so you have these benefits, but you also have all these other things available, all these other programs available to you. So why not try to get through and get the help that you actually need? Which is another completely different story, and that is trying to break through the self-reliant mode of most veterans. It's like, I'll tell my personal story. And my father had numerous operations from his 2 tours in Vietnam. When he retired at 30 years, he was like, I don't need to go to the VA. I'm still healthy. And when he eventually died of some of the things that happened in Vietnam, he was rated at 0%. And shortly thereafter, he was rated at 100% because he was totally disabled, but he was too hard headed to actually do anything.
Well, it's
So,
embarrassing. That term it's got so many interpretations to it that it can be really hard and really hard on your ego, but also, uh, personally admitting that you have these challenges and then trying to figure out, are you going to let them stop you? Are you not? And that's so dependent on what is actually going on and where you're at in your life. Uh, but it can be, that can be a barrier that someone just doesn't want to think, I don't want the world to think I'm broken. I'm not. And especially in rural America, you know, the personality traits here that are really valued are that distinct independence and that you're self-sufficient and family is everything. You should be able to get everything you need from your family, and pride in that independence. And then of course the military turns around and makes that worse because we're really big on, you don't go to medical unless your leg has fallen off, uh, and you can do anything and just suck it up, try harder. If you're failing at a mission, it's because you're not trying hard enough, right? And so you take both of those mentalities and you combine them, and then you put someone where it is physically challenging to access the help that you need, you have a really good chance of that person just saying, nope, I'm not doing it.
right. I mean, what's the, what's the famous thing that you do? Hey, take a couple Motrin, rub some dirt on it, you'll be okay, right? But now, you did mention, aging veterans. It's like as you get older, your parts start to wear out, and they don't work as they should, and now you're kind of stuck with, what do I do? Do I live? Do I live my life? Do I live the rest of my life this way, or do I try to actually do something about it? And so you brought this up, this mentality, this mountain man mentality and this military mentality, where it's, I would call it more stoic than anything else. So how have you been able to break that down so that people will actually access the benefits that they deserve and
Oh,
need?
I cheat. I totally cheat. So uh the I would say more than 50% of our clients come to us, and it's really the adult daughter of a veteran trying to figure out how to, usually it's dad, how to take care of them and what services are available. And so, we really don't get into privacy stuff because I don't need the details. I just need to know, like, hey, give me an overview of what's going on, and then I can start talking to you about what's out there. And then usually that adult daughter is the one who drags mom and dad in, and we have like a three-way conversation. And I don't really talk to the veteran, especially if physically they're shut down. I talk to the daughter and the wife, and I'm very clear on, if the disability benefits go through, if he is found to be service connected and passes away of something that's service connected, that's life changing for you. There are benefits that will carry on until you die. But again, I'm not the one who's going to do that benefit claim. I can't tell you how it will turn out. I can tell you, if you don't even try, you're leaving money on the table. And
Yeah.
so I manipulate the situation as much as I can, uh, for the good of all, I think. Sometimes the veteran is willing to listen, but a lot of times the ones that are there, they know that things are going downhill really fast.
Mm.
And so then it's, how fast can we get them into the services that they need? Um, and then of course there's also usually probably the vets about your age that are actually willing to come in and be like, hey, I'm just trying to like get ahead of things. Do you have any advice for this particular situation, or this is what I'm worried about? Have you heard about something for this? And those are obviously the best ones, because the more that you know, the earlier that you know them, the more likely you are to take advantage.
Right. Right. Interesting. Interesting. Another thing that came out of your annual report was you state that the work ends when a family reaches stability. Can you explain your monthly follow up process and why you believe staying is just as important as showing up?
For a lot of the systems, there's a long backlog. And usually or at least a lot of the time, you don't get a update from your VSO that's putting in the paperwork unless there's actually information to share. And so folks a lot of times feel very lost in the system, very ignored, uh, and just checking in, being like, hey, you know what? I can't do anything about the wait list, but we're still thinking about you. Is there anything else going on that maybe we could work on in the meantime? That particular process is whatever it is. Some processes take 9 months, some take 18 months, some take 3 years.
Right.
So has anything else come up that's adding stress to this? And then a lot of times the caregivers they really need somebody to talk to. Well, they've got options. The VA has a caregiver program. They actually have two parts of that, but on both parts of it, whether it's basically critical care or not, the caregiver has access to mental health resources. And then families also have access to mental health resources through the state Department of Veteran Services. And then there's even more if it's a 9/11 era vet. The vet center will also take care of the families there too. So a lot of times it's the follow up and trying to be like, I know this waiting sucks and I can't do anything about that.
Right.
But maybe you should be talking to somebody who can actually help you process what you're feeling right now. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but I think it helps people not feel like they're being ignored.
Right. Right. My experience, you get a letter from the VA and says, yeah, we're processing your claim. And that's, it's like, well, why'd you waste that piece of paper? You could have emailed me, or you could have just not sent me that piece of paper. But I do see that it is important that, you're people think of you as a professional because you're knowledgeable, you've experienced this, you're knowledgeable of the system. And with Mountain Valor checking in, people are saying, hey, you know what, maybe the VA isn't communicating as well as I'd like them to, but at least I know that I've got somebody in my corner that's keeping up, watching out for me, helping me out and that kind of thing. So I agree, that's a pretty cool thing that you guys are doing, to help these veterans out.
The team cares an awful lot about making sure that we're doing everything that we can for the community. And so much of that is, there's no real metrics that you can show and be like, I had this many conversations that were successful. But we know that a lot of times that very simple, even if it's only like 2 or 3 minutes, that's the thing that prompts somebody to pass our name on to somebody else. And
Right.
that's a lot of times that's the majority of how we get our more clients in.
Right. And you know, I, there are millions of veteran organizations out there, but there aren't a million that are successful. And the fact that you all have had this expansive growth in the past, what's it been, a year and a half, 2 years,
Not
just
quite 2 years
amazing.
yet. Yeah.
And we're out in the middle of nowhere. There's a sign that says nowhere, and it points toward Floyd County, right? And the fact that this thing, Mountain Valor has just grown and grown and grown, and who knows, where it's going to be in 5 years. I mean, in 5 years, it could be as large as some of these national veteran organizations, and it could be replicated all over the United States, especially in rural areas, but not just in rural areas. I mean, large cities probably need a Mountain Valor there as well because the problems are the same, or most of the problems are the same. So, yeah, that's pretty wild. I want to talk about your. I guess it's your, the most important event that you do every year, and that's the Mountain Valor Fest. You started that in 2024. You've done a second edition in 2025, and you've said you've seen a significant increase from 130 to over 160 veterans. What's the vision for replicating this success in other rural regions across the state?
Well, we definitely want to look into that. Of course, doing something that is fun for the whole family is really the priority. And uh, what's weird about Mountain Valor Fest is that's kind of where the formalization of the organization came from. Is that a bunch of us Global War on Terror vets were hanging out at our friend's campground, happens to be a Army vet, and we were very irritated that there was nothing for 9/11 in this half of the state. There's like a stair climb and in Roanoke, and there's a couple very, very small things. Uh, but for our generation, we lost friends and family,
Right.
and that wasn't enough for us. And so it started with talking about like we're going to do an event, and it's going to be great because we're obviously all very overconfident. And then it was, well, if we do this, we should have resources there because it'd be really dumb to get all these veterans in one place at one time and then not bring the resources in. And then as we were talking, about an hour went by, we're like, yeah, no, okay, here's the thing. We won't use them. So if it's not family friendly and you're not there for a while and you don't have that person with you who's kind of nudging you to go talk to that resource, no one's going to go use it. I mean, we've all been to resource fairs. Like you go to the one person that you showed up to talk to in the first place, you ignore the other tables, and you're just trying to get in and out as fast as you can. So how do we manipulate that? Well, it started with bounce houses. So we have like the biggest bounce house you've ever seen. We always get, and then all of these kid events, and there's live music and food trucks, and then the National Guard comes out with a whole bunch of stuff to show off. And 2 years running, we've had a helicopter there because that's something that Floyd folks don't get to see very often. And it turned into something that people are really starting to look forward to and plan ahead. And we play up the rural side as much as we can. You park up in a hayfield, and then you're going to take a hay wagon down, and so you get like that experience. And there's patriotic tattoos for the kids, and there's all sorts of stuff for them to do. And the National Guard actually brought their own bounce house this year. It was like one of the slides, and so my child, who has obviously been to both of them, said the next day, "Hey, Mama, the first Mountain Valor, you had one bounce house. Yeah. The second Mountain Valor, you had two bounce houses. That's an accurate statement, bud. So next year for the third Mountain Valor, you're gonna have three, right? Like you've started a trend, Mom. So we're considering that. But we definitely know that the higher likelihood of the veteran having the conversations they need to have is if they feel supported with someone who they know by their side. But also, we're not just about the veterans. We're very much about supporting that whole family. And it made me really happy this year to see widows come in specifically for the event. And we had quite a few spouses of vets where the vet wasn't interested in talking to the resources, but those widows were because they want to know what's going on, or
Right.
excuse me, those spouses were because they want to know what's going on. And even if folks weren't having that conversation there have been a lot of follow-ups after the fact, which is it's amazing. I'm so happy.
Right. And I think the other cool thing is, a lot of spouses and children don't know what their person in the military did. And so, to be around a lot of veterans and to see, like you said, the National Guard, bringing their toys out to play. That's kind of a cool thing for them because in some cases, the veteran could have served in the military before he was married, he or she were married, and then they come out here and they're married and they've not thought about the military for the last 20, 30, 40, whatever years, and now there's an opportunity to see up close. I mean, we have a veterans parade, but that thing, that happens so rapidly that you really don't see anything. Whereas, the Mountain Valor Fest is an all day event, very somber event, but I think also a great event for the county, and hopefully, like I said, I can see this thing getting larger and larger. So I want to ask probably something that you're not super comfortable about talking about, but Mountain Valor, Mountain Valor needs money. They need volunteers. They need partners. They need everything to make this work. And so, how do you make this work? How did you start with, hey, we're going to have this Mountain Valor Fest, and I don't know who contributed to it, but obviously some organizations contributed. There are obviously a lot of veterans volunteered, but how do you put this all together? And then what's it look like going forward?
Uh, so for the first year, for 2024, we got our IRS determination stating that we were a nonprofit in May. And so Mountain Valor Fest is always the Saturday closest to 9/11.
Right.
Uh, and So then there was a whole bunch of jumping to try to figure out how to make this work. And the first, big sponsor that we had that stepped up to the plate was actually BAE Systems. They have the contract for the Radford Arsenal down the road. And, I contacted their communications folks, and the next day I had, a check, and, or at least the approval for the check. And that was amazing for a couple of reasons. A, we needed it, but B, it was a huge confidence booster that people understand what we're doing. And the
Right.
first year, we definitely hit up a lot of the small businesses in the area, asking for help. We, reached out to friends and family, do everything a small nonprofit does in the beginning, because you don't have any way to prove it's going to work yet. So, you go to those people you have personal relationships with, and I think, well, if I remember right, it was only like $15,000 that we brought in the first year. It was a pretty low amount, but it was enough for Mountain Valor. It was enough to make sure that we had insurance. It was uh, it was an overall success, and we rolled into the next year with money in the bank, which is what everybody wants, right? So this year we raised a little over 40,000,
Wow.
and it was a little easier because we had something to talk about. We had a proof of concept. There were a couple of the community outreaches that we do that potential sponsors had come out to, and I thought that they were just checking up on us, but it turns out they all had veterans in the family that they were trying to get information for. So that means at least one of my communication channels is working. And then we picked up the podcast. We started doing blogs, and really stretched out where we are in the community. So, like we're in the Chamber of Commerce, in a couple counties actually, and reach out and try to do what we can. I just did a conversation over Zoom with about 25 different mental health clinics on, what the difference is when you're talking to a veteran. And, I highlighted like what transition was like for me and how totally overwhelming it was, even though I was like, I'm retired and I did 21 years and I'm still a human. That doesn't change. It shouldn't be this hard. That was a lie. Uh, so we hit the community at a couple different levels, and it's turning into more folks coming to us. And the good thing is, as long as they're happy with our services, the word is getting out that we're making a difference. So we're hoping that has a significant impact on our funding in the future.
Right. And you've had the opportunity to meet with both of our U.S. senators and our U.S. representative, and that certainly can't hurt because they're starting to they're starting to advertise for you as well in certain circles. So that's got to be a great feather in your cap,
It's
right?
an honor. When we got the invite to go up to DC last month, I was like, oh, okay. Not sure I'm ready for that, but let's go meet Senator Kane and Senator Warner. Let's do this. And then Congressman Griffith has come out to both Mountain Valor Fests,
Okay.
and and that was pretty cool. And he also sent his veteran representative to come this year, so she was talking directly to vets as they walked in, seeing what it is they need from his office.
Awesome. Yeah, that can't be anything but good in, like I said, helping with advertising as well as who knows, maybe there'll be a Katt Wittenberger bill someday that that says, hey, Mountain Valor, and here is the approved solution to helping veterans access not just veteran benefits but all benefits that they so much deserve.
We would definitely take it as a compliment if other people mimic what we're doing.
Yeah, that no kidding. That greatest compliment is someone stealing your idea and using it for exactly the same thing that you thought of it for. What final thoughts would you like to leave our audience?
That it's not too late. So a lot of the folks that we've heard from recently have been, veterans who got out in the 70s or 80s, and they don't have their records. There was a big fire at one of the VA warehouses that destroyed all the medical records, about a third of them from that time period. And they're certain that they're not eligible for anything, or that it's not worth the paperwork, it's not worth that hassle. And man, it is. It is. Don't self deny. Don't say no for the VA. Make them work for it. And then that's not all that's out there, you know. I mean, just because maybe you can't get the disability claim through, but there's still the healthcare, there's still home modification processes, there's still uh, you still have options. Don't say no for somebody else.
That's great advice. Excellent advice. Katt, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. For those of you watching the podcast, I hope you received some pearls of wisdom, and I hope you will join me for the next Mountain Valor podcast coming soon. At Mountain Valor, we believe that rural should never mean unserved. Whether you're a veteran looking for the benefits you earned, a neighbor wanting to volunteer your time, or a donor ready to fund our next mission in the hills of Virginia, or even a partner organization, there's a place for you on our team. Visit mountainvalor.org, which is above my name or above my head today to donate, join our mission, or get the support your family deserves. Together, we can build the system our rural veterans have always earned but never had. Thank you very much.
Thank you.